As Taiwan's population slowly becomes super-aged, more and more older adults live alone or in older, unsafe buildings. Officials are discussing ways to solve this issue through urban renewal projects and social housing. However, exorbitant real estate prices, familiarity with their neighborhoods, and emotional connections with their old homes mean many seniors are reluctant to move. Let's hear from some experts and older residents and find out what the real issues are. Our Sunday special report.
Ms. Chang, 93, has lived alone for 10 years in the third floor of an apartment building in Taipei Shilin district that has no elevator. Despite the need to climb the stairs every day when she gets home, Chang has no desire to move elsewhere.
It's no problem. I'm used to it. I'm 93 now, and I have no idea how many years I have left.
Chang sums up the situation faced by older adults in a few words. Since they don't know how many years they have left, many adults her age are resistant to change. In this community, older adults now account for 22% of the residents. That's above the WHO's 20% threshold to be considered a super-aged population. Here, it's not just the people who are older, the buildings are older too.
For example, the 3-story buildings in this neighborhood are all at least 60 years old. The 4-story buildings are nearly 50 years old. In our borough, there aren't many households with access to an elevator, only roughly 7 or 8 in total. It's a very small proportion.
According to statistics, roughly 430,000 older adults live in buildings with no elevator. Interior Ministry data from the first quarter of 2022 showed there were about 671,000 households composed of residents aged 65 or older. Of those, 510,000 were single resident households, a historic high. The greatest percentage of those live in New Taipei, accounting for more than 100,000 households in total, with Taipei coming in second at 76,000. However, not all of those who live in older buildings or who live alone are there for economic reasons. Some have children who've offered to provide other housing options. So why do so many older adults choose to remain in their older apartments? This 80-year-old woman, also surnamed Chang, finishes her exercise class at a local community center and then rushes home to her husband who has reduced mobility. The couple lives apart from their children and grandchildren, and they enjoy their simple life together.
I'm happy living together with my husband. I'm not interested in living together with my children and grandchildren. When I think about all the problems that arise between the typical mother-in-law and daughter-in-law, I think it's better to keep a distance.
When 3 generations live under the same roof, there are lots of problems. For example, there are different habits, different diets, generational differences, and different ideas about raising children. I think living together like that wouldn't be easy.
Young people often say they would prefer not to live together with parents and grandparents, and today grandparents sometimes say the same thing about living with children and grandchildren. Living together means space is more limited, and increasingly grandparents are concerned about maintaining their autonomy and dignity.
In 2016, our survey found that the trend was toward older and younger generations cohabiting. It found that more than 70% of those 65 and older felt that this type of living arrangement was ideal. However, 5 years later, in 2021, only around 50% of respondents felt that this arrangement was a good idea.
Older people are changing their way of thinking, abandoning traditional ideas about living together with the younger generation, and preferring instead to enjoy their own lives.
Hello?
However, as people grow older and their physiological functions deteriorate, the children who live apart from them grow worried about their parents' health and safety. They may wish for their parents to live in a nursing home, which would be safer in an earthquake and has no stairs to climb.
I don't want to move somewhere else because housing is so expensive now. I bought my old home for just around 7 or 8 million NT. If I want to move to a building with an elevator, and if the place has to be bought, that's going to be more of a burden on my children than I want to give them.
High real estate prices are one reason older adults don't wish to move, but another reason is the emotional connection they have with their old home. This 5-story apartment building in New Taipei's Yonghe district is where Mr. Lin bought his first home with his wife when the couple moved to the city from central Taiwan 40 years ago.
About 4 or 5 years after I moved to the Taipei area for business, and we bought our first place. It was also the last place we ever bought. Of course, I have an emotional connection to it.
In the 1970s, to meet the influx of people moving to Taipei for work, a large number of residential buildings were built. These were built 4 or 5 stories in height, meaning they weren't required to have elevators. Many urban migrants bought units in these buildings and started families after establishing their careers. For these people, it's hard to detach themselves from the emotions they have tied up in these homes.
我们常会说 a house is not a home.
We often say that a house is not a home. We call it a house, but no, it's a home. In our research, we discovered that for older adults, a place of residence is not just where they live. The place may also hold special meaning for them, including that attached to their personal development. It's where they raised their family, where they watched their children grow up.
Some people try to send their older parents to a nursing home, only to be met with refusal and a very pointed response.
They may say, "You don't want me, you've grown up, so you just want to abandon me at some care home." Older people may have these types of doubts or thoughts.
Conflict often arises over where older members of a family should live. Children may feel that a change of environment is in their parents' interest, but the parents may prefer to live in their old home.
其实可能2代每次讨论到这个话题就容易就不欢而散了。
It's possible that children and parents will walk away upset every time the issue is discussed. The children worry about their parents' safety and encourage or even demand that they move somewhere else. It may be a good idea to remind younger people and middle-aged people that when they discuss this with their parents, it's best to have a bit more patience.
Lin Jingkun's daughter always maintained hope that she could convince her father to move, but he was not convinced. Later, after learning about a city program that could get her father into social housing immediately, she decided to approach the subject with him once again.
我们换居的原则就是
We exchange housing units on a one-to-one basis. We provide social housing to older people in exchange for their old apartments, allowing them to move into a social housing complex immediately. We take the old apartment and rent it out to a young person.
Mr. Lin and his daughter Li Fen discussed the housing exchange program, including what district he would live in if he participates, and what amenities he would need access to in his new neighborhood.
My daughter lives in Tucheng district. So in other words, if I had to live in Sanchong district or some other part of the city that's far from Tucheng, I couldn't accept that.
Ms. Lin learned that a new social housing complex in Tucheng was near completion, and that the new complex met with her parents' requirements. She brought them to the area to check things out for themselves. Once they realized they could continue the lifestyle patterns in the new neighborhood, they slowly got on board with the idea.
我觉得要循序渐进啦。
I think it has to be done step by step. You have to help older people with moving, and then they may begin to feel at ease. For example, whatever they need to get done, they must know where to do it. If they know where things like the post office, the bank, and the traditional market are, then they get settled, and they will come to accept their new surroundings.
With Ms. Lin's help, her parents made the move from Yonghe to Tucheng. Experts say that if parents are adamant about not moving, it's best to respect their wishes. However, in that case, it is advised to carefully inspect their old apartment to ensure it remains safe.
这个门口进出的门槛我们会注意一下，它这边有没有高低落差太大。
An occupational therapist says 2 areas of the home in particular are places where older adults tend to have falls.
假设我坐在这边， 最常见的就是扶这个洗手台。
For example, if I'm sitting here, I'm likely to hold onto the sink for support. However, I must remind everyone that the sink wasn't designed to support a person's weight. You should think about whether there is something else you could hold on to. Normally, we would advise installing a support bar. The bedside is also an area that is commonly overlooked. When you first wake up, you aren't totally alert, and if you try to quickly stand up and there's nothing to hold on to, you will end up having a fall next to the bed.
需要装个扶手啦，或是要装这个爬楼梯。
He also recommends that older people living in buildings without elevators consider renting a stair climbing device. The expert advises that adults discuss living arrangements with their children before they reach their 70s or 80s, at which time moving becomes more difficult. As Taiwan becomes a super-aged society, the issue of suitable housing for older adults becomes an increasingly pressing issue.